There are secrets that governments bury so deep, they believe no one will ever find them. Secrets hidden inside reinforced concrete walls, guarded by armed soldiers, monitored by surveillance systems so advanced they can detect a human heartbeat from 50 meters away. And then there are secrets so dangerous, so destabilizing, that if the world ever truly understood what was happening inside those walls, everything would change. This is one of those secrets. For years, the Islamic Republic of Iran told the world the same story. Their nuclear program, they insisted, was peaceful. Civilian energy, medical research, nothing more. International inspectors were welcomed selectively. Cameras were installed strategically. And the world, for the most part, chose to believe what it was shown. But what was hidden from the public was far darker than anyone had imagined. Deep inside a facility that didn't officially exist on any public map, Iranian nuclear scientists were doing something that violated every agreement their government had signed. Something that sent shockwaves through the intelligence agencies of a dozen nations. Something that, when it was finally uncovered, made senior officials in Washington, Tel Aviv, and London go completely silent. Iran had enriched uranium to 84% purity. Let that number sit for a moment, because to understand why that number matters, why it terrified some of the most powerful intelligence agencies on Earth, you need to understand one simple fact. Weapons-grade uranium begins at 90%. At 84%, Iran wasn't pursuing civilian energy. At 84%, Iran was standing at the very edge of a nuclear threshold that the world had spent decades trying to prevent any nation from crossing, and they had done it in secret. But what happened next shocked everyone. The discovery didn't come from a military raid. It didn't come from a whistleblower fleeing across a border in the middle of the night. It came from something far more mundane and far more alarming. Routine inspection samples collected by the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, the United Nations watchdog specifically created to make sure moments exactly like this never happened. In early 2023, IAEA inspectors analyzing samples taken from Iran's Fordow nuclear facility found uranium particles enriched to levels that should have been impossible under the current agreement framework, levels that no civilian nuclear program had any legitimate reason to reach. When the results came back from the laboratory, the inspectors read the numbers twice. Then they read them a third time. 84%! The question that immediately followed was not just what Iran had done. The question was how long they had been doing it and what else they were hiding. Because here is what the public record doesn't fully capture. The IAEA had been raising concerns about Iran's nuclear activities for months before this discovery. Inspectors had been denied access to certain facilities. Surveillance cameras, installed under international agreements, had been switched off. Iran had reduced the number of inspectors permitted inside the country. Every one of these actions, taken alone, could be explained away. Taken together, they painted a picture of a government systematically dismantling the international community's binocular ability to see what was really happening. Someone inside already knew the danger. Senior IAEA officials had been quietly warning member states for months that Iran's cooperation had deteriorated to levels not seen since the darkest days of the nuclear standoff in the early 2000s. These warnings were delivered in closed sessions, behind closed doors, away from cameras and press briefings. The public was given reassurances. The diplomats were given something very different. And yet the enrichment continued. To understand the full weight of what Iran had achieved and what it meant for the world. You need to understand the geography of nuclear fear. The Middle East is not a region where nuclear ambition exists in isolation. Israel, Iran's most direct adversary, has maintained a policy of what it calls nuclear ambiguity for decades, neither confirming nor denying its own nuclear arsenal. Saudi Arabia, Iran's regional rival, had already signaled that if Iran acquired nuclear weapons capability, Riyadh would pursue its own. Egypt, Turkey, the dominoes were visible. To anyone paying attention, a nuclear-armed Iran, or even a nuclear threshold Iran, would not just reshape one country's power, it would reshape the entire strategic architecture of the most volatile region on Earth. This was not a theoretical concern sitting in an analyst's report. This was a live, ticking, urgent reality. But what happened inside the diplomatic corridors when the 84% discovery became known to world powers was something the public was never fully told. Emergency consultations were convened. Intelligence assessments were urgently revised. The United States, which had spent years attempting to revive the 2015 nuclear deal, known formally as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, suddenly found itself facing a question its negotiators had not anticipated. What do you offer a country in negotiations when that country has already moved far beyond the boundaries the negotiations were designed to prevent? The truth was far darker than expected, because the 84% figure, alarming as it was only part of the story. What the IAEA also revealed, buried in technical annexes that most news organizations did not fully report, was that Iran had accumulated stockpiles of enriched uranium at multiple levels far exceeding what the original nuclear deal had permitted. At 60% enrichment, Iran's stockpile had grown to quantities that multiple nuclear experts publicly stated were, quote, impossible to justify for any civilian purpose. The 84% discovery was not an isolated incident. It was the visible tip of a program that had been quietly, methodically, deliberately expanding for years, and the cameras that were supposed to be watching had been turned off. In February 2023, the IAEA's Board of Governors passed a resolution censuring Iran for its lack of cooperation. Iran's response was immediate and defiant. Within days, Tehran announced it would disconnect dozens of the agencies monitoring cameras installed at nuclear facilities across the country. Cameras that provided real-time data on uranium stockpiles, centrifuge operations, and enrichment activities. In a single announcement, Iran had effectively blinded the international community's primary tool for verifying what was happening inside its nuclear program. The IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi did not mince his words. He stated publicly that the agency's ability to provide credible assurances about Iran's nuclear activities had been, in his words, seriously undermined. For a diplomat of his experience and measured language, that statement was the equivalent of sounding an alarm in a crowded building. But the world moved on. Other crises demanded attention, other headlines competed for focus, and Iran kept spinning its centrifuges. What makes this story so uniquely chilling is not just the technical achievement it represents. It is what it reveals about the nature of international agreements, the limits of diplomatic pressure, and the terrifying gap between what the world believes is happening and what is actually happening inside the facilities it cannot fully see. The 2015 nuclear deal had been hailed as a landmark achievement of diplomacy. Years of negotiations, some of the most experienced foreign policy minds from 6 world powers sitting across the table from Iranian officials. A detailed, technical, meticulously verified agreement designed with one explicit purpose: to ensure Iran could not develop nuclear weapons while remaining connected to the global economy. By 2023, Iran had more enriched uranium, enriched to higher levels with less international oversight, than at any point since that agreement was signed. Someone had miscalculated, or someone had been deliberately, systematically deceived. The intelligence picture that emerged in the months following the 84% discovery was deeply unsettling. Western intelligence agencies, according to multiple reports, assessed that Iran had developed what analysts described as a breakout capability, the technical ability to produce enough weapons-grade uranium for a nuclear device within a time frame, measured not in years, but in weeks, perhaps less. This assessment was not shared with the public in clear, direct language. It appeared in carefully worded intelligence community reports. It surfaced in background briefings to congressional committees. It was referenced obliquely in think tank publications by former officials who chose their words with practiced caution. But the meaning was unmistakable to anyone who knew how to read it. Iran had not crossed the final line, but it was standing close enough to that line that the distance had become almost irrelevant. What happened next shocked everyone again. In late 2023 and into 2024, a series of events reshaped the entire landscape. The outbreak of conflict in Gaza, following the Hamas attacks of October 7th, drew Iran's proxy network into direct confrontation with Israeli and American forces across multiple fronts simultaneously. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthi forces in Yemen, militia groups in Iraq and Syria. Iran was fighting a multi-front shadow war while simultaneously advancing a nuclear program that the world fully see. The strategic calculus had shifted in ways that analysts were still struggling to fully map. Iran's nuclear ambitions were no longer simply a bilateral issue between Tehran and Washington. They were embedded in a regional war, a global realignment, a fracturing of the international order that had governed nuclear non-proliferation for half a century. And somewhere inside the fortified facilities of Fordow and Natanz, the centrifuges kept spinning. The question that haunted every intelligence briefing, every closed-door diplomatic meeting, every carefully worded official statement was the same question it had always been, just asked with far greater urgency now. How close was Iran really? Because the history of nuclear programs is a history of the world being surprised. The Soviet Union surprised the United States in 1949. China surprised the world in 1964. Pakistan surprised its neighbors in 1998. In every case, the official assessments had been wrong. In every case, the program had moved faster, gone further, hidden more successfully than the watchers had believed possible. And in every case, by the time the world knew the full truth, it was already too late to change it. Iran's nuclear story is not finished. The cameras that were disconnected have not all been reconnected. The stockpiles that were accumulated have not been dismantled. The centrifuges that were spinning have not been stopped. The gap between what Iran has declared and what the IAEA can actually verify remains, in the agency's own careful language, unresolved. Somewhere between the public reassurances and the classified briefings, between the diplomatic statements and the intelligence assessments, between what the world has been told and what the world does not yet know, the truth is still waiting. And the question that no government has yet answered clearly, that no intelligence agency has stated publicly with full confidence, that no diplomat has put on the record without careful qualification, is the question that has always defined Iran's nuclear program. Not what they have declared, what they have not. Because the most dangerous secret in the world is not the one that has been discovered. It is the one that hasn't been yet.